Welcome, dear listeners, to this cozy mystery audiobook, The Sinister Widow of Candlewick Vale, a Miss Marple Killer Mystery. Settle in with a cup of tea as we journey to the charming village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s, where secrets lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. Our sharp-eyed detective, Miss Jane Marple, will unravel a puzzling case with her keen observations and quiet wisdom. This story unfolds over 10 chapters, perfect for a relaxing evening. Thank you for joining us. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1, The Garden Party Surprise. In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, tucked into the verdant folds of the English countryside in the summer of 1952, time seemed to dawdle like a contented bumblebee. The village, with its thatched cottages and cobbled lanes, exuded a timeless charm, as if the modern world had agreed to tiptoe around its borders. Roses spilled over garden fences, their petals catching the golden afternoon light, while the distant bleat of sheep mingled with the laughter of children playing near the village green. At the heart of this idyll stood Candlewick Vale, a grand manor house with ivy-draped walls and mullioned windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. Its sprawling gardens, meticulously tended, were the pride of its owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, a widow of considerable wealth and even more considerable presence. Mrs. Hargrove, a woman in her late 50s with sharp cheekbones and sharper opinions, had inherited a textile fortune from her late husband, Mr. Charles Hargrove, who had passed 5 years prior under whispered circumstances. Some said it was a heart attack, others hinted at darker causes, but the gossip had faded like old chintz. Eleanor ruled Candlewick Vale with the authority of a dowager duchess, her voice carrying over the village like a church bell. Yet, she was not without charm, her smiles as calculated as her business dealings, and her annual garden fete was the highlight of St. Mary Mead's social calendar. On this particular Saturday, the gardens of Candlewick Vale were alive with the hum of the belying a mind as sharp as a tailor's shears. She watched as Mrs. Hargrove glided through the crowd, her black silk dress a stark contrast to the pastel frocks around her, dispensing orders to her staff with the precision of a conductor. "Look at Eleanor, holding court," murmured Mrs. Clara Bantry, a plump, cheerful woman seated beside Miss Marple, fanning herself with a program. "She's got the whole village eating out of her hand." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Indeed, Clara, but even queens must watch their pawns." Her eyes followed Mrs. Hargrove as she paused to reprimand Lily Baxter, her young maid, who was balancing a tray of teacups with nervous care. Lily, a slight girl of 20 with mousy hair and anxious eyes, blushed furiously under her mistress's scrutiny. Across the lawn, the vicar, Reverend Thomas Whitaker, was engaged in conversation with Dr. Reginald Hayes, the village physician. The Reverend, a kindly man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and a gentle smile, was a beloved figure, known for his sermons on forgiveness and his tireless work for the church. Dr. Hayes, a wiry man in his 50s with a perpetually furrowed brow, seemed less at ease, his hands fidgeting as he spoke. Miss Marple noted the tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted toward the tea tent where Lily was now arranging cups. Nearby, Harold Finch, the manor's gardener, was adjusting a trellis of climbing roses, a burly man in his 40s with hands roughened by years of toil. Harold moved with a quiet intensity, his face half hidden by a battered cap. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him, catching the faint scent of herbs clinging to his corduroy jacket. Time, perhaps, or something less benign. Foxglove grew in the manor's borders, she recalled, its delicate purple bells hiding a deadly secret. The fete was in full swing when young Arthur Whitaker, the vicar's nephew, arrived, drawing eyes with his easy charm and disheveled good looks. But purposeful. He took a delicate china teacup from Lily, its rim adorned with tiny roses, and raised it to his lips. Then, without warning, a gasp tore through the crowd. The vicar's hand flew to his throat, the teacup slipping from his fingers to shatter on the grass. His face contorted, turning a ghastly shade of purple, and he staggered forward, clutching at the air. A woman screamed, and the band faltered into silence. Dr. Hayes rushed to the vicar's side, his medical bag already in hand. But it was too late. The Reverend collapsed onto the manicured lawn, his eyes wide and unseeing. A hush fell over the fete, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a child. Dr. Hayes knelt beside the body, his fingers searching for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up, his face grim. "He's gone," he said quietly. "Poison, I'd wager. Likely in the tea." The word poison sent a ripple of horror through the crowd. Mrs. Hargrove, standing frozen by the tea tent, clutched her handkerchief, her face pale beneath her rouge. Lily dropped a tray, the clatter of china jarring in the silence. Harold Finch stepped forward, his expression unreadable, while Arthur Whitaker stared at his uncle's body, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Miss Marple set down her knitting, her needles stilled for the first time that afternoon. Her mind, sharp as ever, began to turn over the scene like a gardener inspecting soil. Poison in broad daylight, at a village fete? It was bold, almost theatrical. She scanned the faces around her. Mrs. Hargrove's tight-lipped shock, Lily's trembling hands, Harold's stoic silence, Arthur's pallor, Dr. Hayes's hurried efficiency. Each held a piece of the puzzle, she was certain, but the picture was far from clear. "Who could have done this?" Clara Bantry whispered, her fan forgotten in her lap. The vicar of all people. He hadn't an enemy in the world. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "My dear Clara, speculation that drifted like mist. The death of Reverend Thomas Whitaker, poisoned in broad daylight, had shaken the community to its core, and every cottage window seemed to peer out with suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the somber mood, rose early, her routine as precise as the ticking of the grandfather clock in her parlor. She donned a tweed skirt and a pale blue cardigan, her silver hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, and set out for Candlewick Vale under the guise of offering condolences. In truth, her sharp mind was already sifting through the events of the previous day, piecing together fragments of conversation, glances, and gestures. To Miss Marple, a village was like a tapestry. Each thread, however ordinary, could reveal a pattern when viewed with care. The walk to the manor was pleasant, the air heavy with the scent of dew-kissed roses and the faint hum of bees. Candlewick Vale loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls both grand and foreboding in the morning light. Miss Marple's sensible shoes crunched on the gravel path as she approached the front door, where she was greeted by Lily Baxter, the young maid whose nervous demeanor at the fete had not gone unnoticed. Lily's eyes were red-rimmed, her apron slightly askew, and she clutched a duster as if it were a lifeline. "Oh, Miss Marple," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's so kind of you to come. Mrs. Hargrove is in the drawing room. It's been dreadful, just dreadful." "Indeed, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but her eyes keen. "A terrible shock for us all. Might I have a word with your mistress?" Lily nodded and led her through the grand hall, where portraits of stern Hargrove ancestors gazed down with disapproval. The drawing room was a study in elegance, with polished mahogany furniture, heavy velvet drapes, and a silver tea service gleaming on a sideboard. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove sat by the window, her black dress absorbing the light like a storm cloud. She held a lace handkerchief, like an accusation. "Indeed," she said. "Tell me, who prepared the tea yesterday? It was such a busy day." The widow hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "That would be Lily. She's been with me for years, poor thing. Devoted, but a bit scatterbrained at times. I suppose anyone could have tampered with the tray in all that chaos." As if on cue, the door opened, and Harold Finch, the manor's gardener, entered with a bouquet of freshly cut roses. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his hands, roughened by years of labor, cradled the flowers with surprising care. His corduroy jacket carried the earthy scent of soil, mingled with a faint herbal note, rosemary perhaps, or something sharper. Miss Marple's nose twitched. She knew foxglove grew in the manor's borders, its toxic properties no secret to those familiar with gardens. "Morning, ma'am," Harold said gruffly, nodding to Mrs. Hargrove. "These are for the hall table. Police have been trampling my beds, asking fool questions." He glanced at Miss Marple, his eyes narrowing slightly before he turned to leave. Miss Marple's mind catalogued the moment. Harold's calloused hands, the herbal scent, the faint resentment in his tone. Could a gardener, so attuned to plants, have known how to extract poison from foxglove? She filed the thought away, her expression serene. Leaving Candlewick Vale, Miss Marple made her way to the village tea shop, a cozy establishment run by Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, whose knack for gossip rivaled her skill with scones. The shop was crowded with villagers, their voices a low hum of speculation. Miss Marple took a seat by the window, her knitting bag at her side, and ordered a pot of Earl Grey. As she sipped, she overheard young Arthur Whitaker, the vicar's nephew, speaking to Mrs. Pritchard at the counter. "It's awful, Mrs. P," Arthur said, his voice heavy with emotion. He was a striking figure, with tousled dark hair and paint-flecked fingers, his tweed jacket as rumpled as his demeanor. "Uncle Thomas was going to lend me money for a studio with the vicar near the rose maze." The churchyard dispute, she knew, involved a plot of land Dr. Hayes wanted for a new surgery, which the vicar had opposed on historical grounds. Motives, she thought, were sprouting like weeds in a neglected garden. The tea shop buzzed with theories. Some whispered of a jilted lover, others of a disgruntled parishioner. Mrs. Pritchard leaned over the counter, her voice low. "I heard Lily Baxter was seen fussing with the tea tray just before the vicar took his cup. And she's sweet on Arthur, isn't she? Perhaps they planned it together." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Gossip, like tea leaves, often held fragments of truth, but it required careful sifting. She thought of Lily's trembling hands at the fete, the way she had hovered near the tea tent, and Arthur's shaky demeanor. Then there was Mrs. Hargrove's guarded pause, Harold's herbal scent, and Dr. Hayes's fidgety hands. Each was a thread in the tapestry, but which led to the poison. As she left the tea shop, Miss Marple paused by the village green, where children were playing hopscotch, oblivious to the shadow cast by the vicar's death. She glanced toward the church, its spire piercing the sky like a question mark. The vicar had been a man of principle, but principles could make enemies. Had he uncovered a secret too dangerous to keep? She recalled whispers from years ago about Mr. Hargrove's sudden death. A heart attack officially, but village tongues had wagged about poison even then. Miss Marple's steps were slow as she returned home, her mind turning over the clues like a farmer testing soil. The shattered teacup with its rose pattern, the foxglove in the garden, the arguments overheard, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. Yet she knew that in St. Mary Mead, as in all small places, secrets were never buried deep. They lingered in the glances exchanged over teacups, in the pauses between words, in the ordinary moments that hid extraordinary truths. By the time she reached her cottage, the sun was climbing higher. Vicar's final moments. Under the pretense of a memorial tea to honor the departed, she invited the key figures to her modest cottage, where her parlor, with its chintz curtains and polished oak table, offered a cozy yet probing setting. Miss Marple's cottage was a study in understated charm, its walls adorned with watercolors of local landscapes and shelves lined with well-thumbed books. A vase of fresh daisies sat on the table, their simplicity a contrast to the intricate motives she suspected lay beneath the village's surface. As she prepared a tray of tea and scones, her hands moved with practiced ease, but her mind was busy, sifting through the details of the fete, the shattered teacup, the scent of herbs on Harold Finch, the widow's guarded pause, and young Arthur's trembling hands. Each was a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. The first to arrive was Lily Baxter, the young maid from Candlewick Vale, her mousy hair pinned hastily and her eyes darting nervously. She wore a plain gray dress, its hem slightly frayed, and clutched a small handbag as if it might anchor her against the storm of suspicion. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice quavering. "It's so kind of you to host this. The vicar was always good to me, giving me advice when I was troubled." Miss Marple smiled warmly, guiding Lily to a chair. "You poor dear. It must be dreadful for you. I understand you prepared the tea at the fete. Such a responsibility." She poured a cup of Earl Grey, her eyes noting the way Lily's fingers trembled as she accepted it. "Yes, miss," Lily replied, staring into her tea as if it held answers. "I brewed it myself, like always. Mrs. Hargrove is particular about her tea. Assam, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. But during the fete, I left the tray unattended for a moment to fetch more cups. Anyone could have tampered with it." Her voice broke and she looked away, her cheeks flushing. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. But her mind catalogued the detail. An unattended tray was a convenient excuse, or a for coming, Mr. Finch," Miss Marple said, offering him a scone, which he declined with a shake of his head. "You must be terribly busy with the gardens, especially after the police's interference." Harold's jaw tightened. "Aye. They've made a mess of my flower beds, poking about for no good reason. I was tending the roses all day at the fete, nowhere near the tea tent. but I saw the vicar arguing with Mrs. Hargrove near the maze. Looked heated, it did. Something about money, I reckon. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she began knitting, her eyes never leaving Harold's face. Money can stir such passions, she murmured. Did you hear anything specific? Not much, Harold admitted, shifting uncomfortably. Just raised voices. The vicar was waving his arms, and Mrs. Hargrove looked fit to burst. Then he went to the tea tent and, well... He shrugged, his expression unreadable. The door opened again, and Arthur Whitaker strode in, his tweed jacket as rumpled as ever. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and he flashed a charming smile that didn't quite reach them. "Miss Marple, you're a saint for this," he said, taking a seat with a flourish. "Uncle Thomas would have loved a proper send-off like this." "You're very kind to say so, Mr. Whitaker," Miss Marple replied, pouring him tea. "Your uncle spoke so fondly of you, though I gather he worried about your future." Arthur's smile faltered. "He was always meddling, bless him. Wanted me to settle down, get a proper job. Said my painting was a waste of time. But poison, I'd never." His voice rose, and he set his cup down with a clatter, drawing a sharp glance from Harold. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Of course not, dear. Though I imagine his financial support was important to you. His passing must be a blow." Arthur's face darkened, and he ran a hand through his hair. "He was going to lend me money for a studio. Now I'm in a bind. But that's not a reason to... Well," Needles paused briefly. "How fascinating. And so easy to find in a place like Candlewick Vale, with its lovely borders." She turned to the group, her tone light but probing. "It's curious, isn't it, how such a tragedy happened in plain sight. I wonder if anyone noticed anything unusual near the tea tent." The room grew quiet, the only sound the faint clink of teacups. Lily's hands trembled, and she set her cup down, spilling a few drops. Harold stared at the floor, his jaw set. Arthur fidgeted, his fingers drumming on the table. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Lily blurted, "I saw Mr. Finch near the tent earlier, carrying a spade. I thought he was just working, but..." Harold's head snapped up. "I was fixing a trellis, girl, not skulking about with poison. You do well to watch your tongue." Now, Miss Marple interjected, her voice soothing. "We're all upset. Let's not accuse without cause." But her mind was racing. A spade near the tea tent? She recalled the Manor's garden tools, some sharp enough to harvest plants with precision. And Lily's quick accusation. Fear or deflection? As the gathering drew to a close, the guests departed one by one, their footsteps heavy on the cottage's stone path. Miss Marple saw them out, her smile unwavering, but her eyes caught a small detail. As Lily stood to leave, a handkerchief slipped from her pocket, landing on the floor. It was delicately embroidered with the letter A. Arthur's initial, perhaps, or a coincidence. Miss Marple retrieved it discreetly, tucking it into her knitting bag. Alone in her parlor, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her needles resuming their rhythm. The afternoon had been illuminating, though not in the way her guests might have thought. Lily's trembling hands and quick accusations suggested fear, perhaps of her own involvement. Harold's defensiveness masked something, guilt, or merely resentment at being suspected. Arthur's charm felt forced, his debts a looming shadow. And Dr. Hayes, with his knowledge of digitalis and cautious demeanor, casting long shadows across the village's winding lanes and thatched cottages. The air carried a faint chill, a reminder that summer's warmth was fleeting, much like the peace that had been shattered by Reverend Thomas Whitaker's poisoning at Candlewick Vale's garden fete. By Monday afternoon, the village buzzed with unease, as neighbors exchanged wary glances and whispers over garden fences. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained undaunted, her sharp mind sifting through the fragments of conversation and clues gathered at her memorial tea the previous day. The embroidered handkerchief with its enigmatic A, Lily Baxter's trembling accusation, Harold Finch's gruff defensiveness, Arthur Whitaker's forced charm, and Dr. Reginald Hayes's cautious expertise, all swirled in her thoughts like leaves in an autumn breeze. Determined to pursue the truth, Miss Marple decided to visit the churchyard where the vicar had been laid to rest with unseemly haste. The church, a sturdy Norman structure with a weathered spire, stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its graveyard a patchwork of moss-covered stones and fresh flowers. As she walked the familiar path, her sensible shoes crunching on gravel, Miss Marple reflected on the village's rhythms. St. Mary Mead was a place where secrets like weeds took root in the quiet spaces, behind closed doors, in hushed conversations, or beneath the earth itself. The churchyard was silent save for the rustle of yew trees and the distant coo of a pigeon. Miss Marple paused by the vicar's grave, a simple mound marked by a wooden cross, awaiting a proper headstone. A bouquet of lilies lay atop it, their petals wilting in the late afternoon light. She knelt, ostensibly to adjust the flowers, but her eyes scanned the surrounding earth for anything amiss. The soil was freshly turned, unremarkable, yet something about the scene felt staged, as if the haste of the burial concealed more than grief. As she rose, she spotted Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove near an older grave, her black dress stark against the green. Coarse but persistent. Mrs. Hargrove's lips tightened. Gossip is a cruel thing, Miss Marple. People whispered of foul play, but it was nonsense. Charles had a weak heart. Dr. Hayes confirmed it. The vicar put such rumors to rest. She turned away, her fingers twisting her handkerchief. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the grave. The whispers of poison in Charles Hargrove's death, dismissed as idle chatter, now seemed eerily prescient. Could the vicar have known something more? She filed the thought away, her gaze drifting to a nearby flower bed where foxglove grew, its purple bells swaying innocently. As she left the churchyard, Miss Marple encountered Mrs. Clara Bantry, her friend from the fete, hurrying along with a basket of apples. "Jane, you're poking about again, aren't you?" Clara said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "The village is in a tizzy. They're saying Harold Finch was seen digging in the manor gardens late Saturday night. Burying evidence, perhaps?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Gossip is a curious thing, Clara. It often points to shadows rather than substance. But I'll have a look." She made her way to Candlewick Vale's gardens, where Harold Finch was raking leaves with methodical precision. His broad frame moved with purpose, but his eyes darted toward her as she approached. "Mr. Finch," she called, her voice carrying over the rustle of leaves. "Might I trouble you for a moment?" Harold leaned on his rake, his expression wary. "Miss Marple, what brings you back?" More questions about the fete? Only a small matter, she said, her tone disarming. I heard you were working late Saturday. The gardens must keep you terribly busy. His jaw tightened. I was turning compost. Nothing sinister about it, despite what folks say. Police already checked, found nothing but muck. He gestured to a pile of compost near the rose maze, its earthy scent mingling with the roses. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the area. The compost heap was unremarkable, but she noticed underestimate village spinsters. He tipped his hat, his expression one of polite impatience. Miss Marple, he said, I hear you've been asking questions. This is police business, you know. We've got our eye on Finch, suspicious behavior, digging at odd hours. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Of course, Inspector, but village gossip can be misleading. Mr. Finch's compost heap seems innocent enough, though I wonder about that spade. Have you found it? Craddock frowned. Not yet, but we're searching. Poison's a nasty business, and we'll get to the bottom of it without amateur sleuthing. He strode off toward the manor, leaving Miss Marple to suppress a smile. Amateurs, she knew, often saw what professionals overlooked. She returned to the village, pausing at the tea shop to gather her thoughts over a cup of chamomile. Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, the shop's loquacious owner, was quick to share the latest rumors. They're saying the vicar was onto something, Miss Marple, she whispered, leaning over the counter. Something about Mrs. Hargrove's money. Maybe she was siphoning church funds. And Lily Baxter's been acting odd, hasn't she? Always mooning over Arthur Whitaker. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning to Lily's handkerchief with its embroidered A. Was it Arthur's, a token of affection, or something planted to mislead? And Mrs. Hargrove's guarded demeanor at the churchyard suggested more than grief. The widow's wealth, inherited from a questionable death, cast a long shadow, and the vicar's role in quelling those rumors hinted at a deeper connection. As evening fell, Miss Marple walked home, the church spire silhouetted against a crimson sky. The churchyard visit had raised more questions than answers, but she felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The spade, the foxglove, the whispers of old scandals, all pointed to a motive rooted in the past. Had the vicar uncovered a truth that cost him his life? And who among the suspects, Mrs. Hargrove, Harold, Lily, Arthur, or Dr. Hayes, had part lay just beyond her grasp? Chapter 5. The Artist's Alibi. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft hues of amber and rose. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming honeysuckle. But an undercurrent of unease lingered after the poisoning of Reverend Thomas Whitaker at Candlewick Vale's garden fete. The village, usually a tapestry of cheerful greetings and clinking teacups, felt taut, as if each cobblestone held a secret waiting to be unearthed. Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eye for the subtleties of human nature, sensed the threads of the mystery tightening. The churchyard visit had yielded intriguing clues. The missing spade, Mrs. Hargrove's guarded demeanor, and whispers of old scandals. But the picture remained incomplete. Today, she resolved to tug at another thread. Arthur Whitaker, the vicar's charming but debt-ridden nephew. Miss Marple set out after breakfast, her tweed coat buttoned against the morning chill, her knitting bag slung over her arm like a detective's toolkit. Her destination was Arthur's studio, a ramshackle shed behind the vicarage, where he pursued his artistic dreams amidst a clutter of canvases and paint tubes. The vicarage itself was a modest stone building, its garden overgrown with nettles, a stark contrast to the manicured elegance of Candlewick Vale. As she approached, Miss Marple noted the faint sound of a gramophone drifting from the shed, playing a melancholy jazz tune that seemed at odds with the village's pastoral calm. Arthur greeted her at the door, his dark hair tousled and his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing paint-stained forearms. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," he said, his smile bright but brittle, like a cracked teacup. "Come in, though I warn you it's a bit of a mess." His voice carried a forced cheer, and his eyes darted nervously as he ushered her inside. The studio was a chaos of creativity, with canvases propped against walls, some half-finished, others abandoned. Paintbrushes bristled in jam jars, and the air was thick with clouding. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, settling into a rickety chair. "It must be difficult, losing both your uncle and your plans. I understand you were sketching in the woods during the fete. A peaceful spot, I imagine." Arthur's eyes flickered, and he busied himself rearranging paintbrushes. "Yes, just past the old oak grove. I needed a break from the crowd. Got some good sketches, though I left them in the woods by mistake. Clumsy of me." His smile was strained, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand, reminiscent of the fete. "These things happen," she said kindly, her mind racing. The woods were a convenient alibi, far from the tea tent where the vicar had been poisoned. But Arthur's nervous demeanor suggested more than grief. She thought of the handkerchief with the embroidered A from her tea gathering, now tucked safely in her knitting bag. Could it be his, dropped by Lily Baxter in a moment of carelessness? Or was it a deliberate misdirection? As she pondered, the door creaked open, and Lily herself appeared, carrying a basket of laundry. Her eyes widened at the sight of Miss Marple, and she nearly dropped the basket. "Oh, miss, I didn't know you'd be here," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. "I was just bringing Mr. Arthur some clean linens from the vicarage." "How thoughtful," Miss Marple said, her gaze lingering on Lily's nervous hands. "You must be close to Arthur, helping him in such a difficult time." Lily's blush deepened, and she glanced at Arthur, who avoided her gaze. "We're friends, miss. I admired the vicar, and Arthur's been kind to me." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple sensed a deeper connection, perhaps a secret romance the vicar had disapproved of. Jealousy, she knew, could be a potent motive, especially if the vicar had threatened to expose it. Arthur cleared his throat. "Lily's a good sort, always helping out. But I was nowhere near the tea tent when Uncle took ill. I swear it." His insistence felt rehearsed, and Miss Marple's needles. Marple sensed his unease. Outside, the village was stirring, with children playing near the green and the church bell tolling noon. Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind piecing together the morning's observations. Arthur's alibi was shaky, his presence in the woods unverified, and the foxglove in his painting was a curious detail. Artistic license or a subconscious slip? The bills suggested financial strain, and Lily's flustered appearance hinted at a connection that went beyond friendship. Had the vicar discovered their relationship, threatening to cut Arthur off? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the village square. Inspector Craddock, his face stern, was escorting Harold Finch toward the police van. A small crowd had gathered, whispering excitedly. Miss Marple approached Mrs. Clara Bantry, who was watching with wide eyes. "Jane, they've arrested Harold," Clara exclaimed, clutching her shopping basket. "They found a vial of something in his shed. Poison, they think. And that spade you mentioned? It's gone missing entirely." Miss Marple's lips pursed thoughtfully. "How curious. Though I suspect Mr. Finch is not our culprit. The evidence is too tidy, Clara, like a novel with the ending spelled out." She recalled Harold's gruff insistence on his innocence, and the compost heap that held no secrets. A vial in his shed felt planted, a red herring meant to distract. She decided to visit the tea shop, where Mrs. Agnes Pritchard was serving scones and gossip in equal measure. "It's Harold Finch, mark my words," Mrs. Pritchard said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Always skulking about that one. And Lily Baxter's been acting queer. Seen her whispering with Arthur behind the vicarage. Lovers, I'd bet. And the vicar didn't approve." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the new information. The missing spade, the vial, Lily's connection to Arthur. All were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. Harold's arrest seemed premature, a distraction rooted in secrets. The handkerchief with its A remained a tantalizing clue. Its owner unclear, but its significance undeniable. As the village settled into evening, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the tea tent, where a delicate cup had delivered death. The poison had been precise, the act bold, and she suspected the truth lay not in grand gestures but in the quiet moments of St. Mary Mead. A glance, a lie, a brushstroke of purple paint. Tomorrow she would seek out Dr. Hayes, whose knowledge of digitalis and connection to the Hargrove family warranted closer scrutiny. Chapter 6. Doctor's Dilemma. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm, golden glow across the village's thatched cottages and winding lanes. Yet it did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that had settled like dew after Reverend Thomas Whitaker's poisoning at Candlewick Vale's garden fete. The arrest of Harold Finch, the manor's gruff gardener, had sent ripples of gossip through the village, but Miss Jane Marple remained unconvinced of his guilt. The vial found in his shed and the missing spade felt too convenient, like a poorly stitched seam in a quilt. Her visit to Arthur Whitaker's studio had only deepened the mystery, with his shaky alibi, the curious foxglove in his painting, and Lily Baxter's flustered presence suggesting tangled motives. Now, Miss Marple turned her attention to Dr. Reginald Hayes, whose medical expertise and tense demeanor at her tea gathering hinted at secrets yet to be unraveled. Miss Marple, dressed in a neat gray coat and carrying her ever-present knitting bag, decided to pay the doctor a visit under the pretext of a minor ailment. A headache, she claimed, though her mind was as clear as the church bell tolling across the green. Dr. Hayes's surgery was a small, ivy-covered building near the village square, its waiting room sparsely furnished with creaky chairs and a stack of outdated magazines. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, mingled with the musty scent of old books. Dr. Hayes greeted her with arrest, matched the vicar's condition perfectly. He busied himself with a thermometer, avoiding her gaze. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she began knitting, her eyes never leaving the doctor. "How fascinating, and so easy to obtain. with foxglove growing in the manor's gardens. I suppose you've prescribed it often? Dr. Hayes nodded, his expression guarded. To several patients, yes. It's common enough. But I keep strict records and nothing's missing from my stock. He opened his bag to retrieve a notepad, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of several glass vials inside, one, curiously, without a label. It was small, barely noticeable, but her mind seized on it like a cat on a mouse. Of course, she said, her tone disarming. Though I imagine it must be difficult with so many patients. I recall you treated Mr. Hargrove before his passing, didn't you? Such a tragedy, his heart attack. Dr. Hayes stiffened, his hand tightening on the notepad. Yes, Charles Hargrove. A weak heart, I'm afraid. I did what I could, but it was sudden. The vicar was a great comfort to Mrs. Hargrove afterward. His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered toward the window, as if seeking escape. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. She recalled the village whispers about Charles Hargrove's death, officially a heart attack, but tinged with rumors of poison. Dr. Hayes had signed the death certificate, and the vicar had quelled the gossip. Had the Reverend known something more? She decided to press gently. The vicar was such a perceptive man, she said, always noticing the little things. I wonder if he ever mentioned anything unusual about that time. Dr. Hayes's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. Nothing unusual, Miss Marple. Just grief and rumors, as villages are prone to. Now about that headache, shall I prescribe something? His attempt to change the subject was smooth, but Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hand as he reached for a pen. No need, dear, she said, rising. Made her way to Candlewick Vale, where Inspector Craddock was questioning Mrs. Hargrove in the drawing room. The widow, dressed in her customary black, stood by the fireplace, her face a mask of indignation. It's preposterous, Mrs. Hargrove snapped, brandishing the note, a single sheet of paper with neat, slanting handwriting. I've never touched church funds. This is a forgery meant to ruin me. Miss Marple, allowed to linger as a concerned neighbor, examined the note discreetly. The ink was a deep blue, with a slight sheen that reminded her of Arthur Whitaker's art supplies. The handwriting, however, was unfamiliar. Precise, but not Mrs. Hargrove's florid script. A cruel accusation, Miss Marple murmured. Though I wonder who might benefit from such a lie. Craddock, his patience wearing thin, turned to her. Miss Marple, this is police business. The note suggests a motive. Mrs. Hargrove may have silenced the vicar to protect her reputation. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes flashed. I did no such thing. The vicar and I argued, yes, but only about donations. He wanted more for the church roof, and I thought it extravagant. Poison him? Absurd. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The note was a red herring, she suspected, designed to shift suspicion onto the widow. Its ink linked it to Arthur, but the handwriting suggested another hand. Perhaps Lily, whose nervous demeanor hinted at hidden loyalties? Or was Dr. Hayes, with his access to the vicarage as the vicar's physician, involved in planting it? As she left the manor, Miss Marple encountered Lily Baxter in the garden, pruning roses with a pair of shears. The maid started at her approach, nearly dropping the tool. Miss Marple, I was just tidying up. Her eyes darted toward the house, and Miss Marple noted the shears, sharp, precise, capable of cutting foxglove stems. You're doing a fine job, dear, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. though I imagine it's hard to focus with all this trouble. You were close to the vicar, weren't you? Lily nodded. Expertise with digitalis made him a prime suspect, but his nervousness suggested fear rather than guilt. Was he protecting someone? Mrs. Hargrove, perhaps, whose wealth and past tied them together? Or was he a victim of his own mistakes, blackmailed by the vicar's knowledge? As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the village bathed in twilight. She settled by the fire, her knitting needles clicking as she reflected. The note was a distraction, but the vial and the shears were tangible clues. Dr. Hayes's bag held secrets, and Lily's connection to Arthur suggested a motive tied to love or loyalty. Harold's arrest, she felt certain, was a misstep, his gruffness masking innocence. The true culprit was closer, their actions hidden in the ordinary rhythms of St. Mary Mead. The mystery was like a skein of wool, tangled, but not unbreakable. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the gardens, where foxglove grew and secrets were buried. Tomorrow, she would revisit Candlewick Vale, seeking the precise cuts of a killer's hand. As the fire crackled, she knew the truth lay in the details. A vial, a note, a glance, and she was determined to unravel it. Chapter 7. Hidden Herbs and Hearts. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a gauzy veil that softened the edges of its thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. The air was heavy with the scent of damp grass and fading roses, a reminder that summer was giving way to autumn's quiet inevitability. The poisoning of Reverend Thomas Whitaker at Candlewick Vale's garden fete had cast a long shadow, and though Harold Finch's arrest had briefly quelled the village's unease, Miss Jane Marple knew the truth remained elusive. The forged note accusing Mrs. Hargrove, Dr. Hayes's unlabeled vial, Arthur Whitaker's shaky alibi, and Lily Baxter's nervous glances were threads in a tapestry yet to be fully woven. Today, Miss Marple resolved to return to the heart of the mystery, the gardens of Candlewick Vale. "Marple," he grunted, barely glancing up. "Back to poke about, are you?" "Only admiring your handiwork, Mr. Finch," she replied, her tone warm but probing. "The gardens are a credit to you, though I imagine the police have made your work difficult." Harold snorted, stabbing his trowel into the soil. "Aye, trampling my beds and accusing me of murder. That vial was nonsense. Someone planted it, and my spade's still missing. I keep my tools locked, always have." His voice was gruff, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of sincerity in his eyes. She knelt by a cluster of foxglove, her fingers brushing the delicate bells. "Such striking plants," she said, "though dangerous, I'm told. Have you noticed anyone tending them recently?" Her eyes caught a subtle detail. Several stems bore clean, precise cuts, as if harvested with a sharp tool, not a gardener's rough shears, but something finer, like medical scissors. Harold shook his head. "I don't touch the stuff, too risky. But I saw Lily Baxter out here a few days before the fete, fussing with the flowers. Said she was picking blooms for the house, but she looked nervous." He pointed to a spot near the rose maze where the earth was slightly disturbed. Miss Marple's lips pursed thoughtfully. Lily's presence in the garden, combined with her nervous demeanor and the handkerchief, suggested a deeper role. Had she harvested the foxglove, or was she covering for someone else? Miss Marple thanked Harold and moved toward the rose maze, her eyes scanning the ground. Near a stone bench, she found a small patch of soil where the grass was flattened, as if someone had stood there for some time. A faint glint caught her eye, a tiny shard of glass, barely larger than a pinhead, half buried in the dirt. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind racing. A broken vial, perhaps, discarded in haste? Her investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Lily Baxter, carrying a basket of laundry toward the manor. The maid froze at the sight of Miss Marple, her eyes wide.
Misplaced my own pair, miss. It was just for a moment. She hurried off, her steps uneven, leaving Miss Marple to ponder the lie. Dr. Hayes's scissors, sharp enough for surgery, could easily cut Foxglove with the precision she'd observed. Was Lily protecting herself, or someone else? Returning to the village, Miss Marple stopped by the tea shop, where Mrs. Agnes Pritchard was serving a gaggle of gossiping villagers. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Pritchard exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "They're saying Arthur Whitaker's alibi is falling apart. Old Mrs. Grayson saw him near the tea tent during the fete, not in the woods like he claimed. Fetching paints, he said, but she swears he looked shifty." Miss Marple sipped her chamomile tea, her mind turning over the new information. Arthur's crumbling alibi was significant, especially given the foxglove in his painting and the A handkerchief. Had he been near the tea tent to tamper with the vicar's cup, or was he merely an unlucky bystander? She recalled his financial troubles and Lily's flustered reaction in his studio. A secret romance, perhaps, complicated by the vicar's disapproval? Her thoughts were interrupted by Inspector Craddock, who entered the shop with a scowl. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "I hear you've been snooping in the gardens. We've cleared Finch, but we're looking at Arthur Whitaker now. That note we found, its ink matches his art supplies, and Mrs. Grayson's testimony places him at the scene." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "How diligent, Inspector. Though I wonder if the note's purpose was to distract us from the true culprit. Have you examined Dr. Hayes's medical supplies? Digitalis is his domain, after all." Craddock frowned. "We're checking everyone, but Hayes is a respected doctor. No motive, unless you count his spat with the vicar over the churchyard land." He strode off, leaving Miss Marple to her tea and her thoughts. The mention of Dr. Hayes brought her back to the unlabeled vial in his bag. His connection to Charles Hargrove's death, ruled a heart attack but shadowed by rumors, was another. Arthur, not the widow. As she examined the ledger, Miss Marple noticed a faint smudge of purple paint on the corner of the desk, similar to the shade on Arthur's thumb. Had he been here, rifling through his uncle's papers? She tucked the ledger into her bag, intending to study it later, and left the vicarage with her mind abuzz. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting needles clicking as she pieced together the day's findings. The foxglove's precise cuts, Lily's lie about the scissors, Arthur's broken alibi, and the purple smudge formed a pattern, but Dr. Hayes's role was the most troubling. His medical knowledge, his connection to the Hargrove family, and the unlabeled vial suggested a deeper involvement. Had he poisoned Charles Hargrove years ago, perhaps accidentally, and silenced the vicar to keep it buried? Or was he protecting Mrs. Hargrove, whose wealth and charm might have ensnared him? The village settled into dusk, the church bell tolling softly. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the tea tent, where a delicate cup had delivered death. The culprit was close, she felt certain, their actions hidden in plain sight. The handkerchief, the vial, the scissors,
and the paint were clues, but the motive, love, greed, or fear, remained elusive. Tomorrow she would confront the suspects, weaving their contradictions into a trap. As her needles danced, she knew the truth was near, waiting in the quiet corners of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 8. Narrowing the Net. The late morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the village's cobblestone lanes and thatched roofs. The scent of wood smoke and damp leaves hung in the air, a reminder of autumn's approach, but the warmth of summer lingered in the hedgerows, where blackberries ripened unnoticed. The poisoning of Reverend Thomas Whitaker at Candlewick Vale's garden fete had unsettled the village's tranquil rhythm. And though Harold Finch had been released for lack of evidence, suspicion still clouded the air. Miss Jane Mark's expertise and the vial in his bag kept him in her sights, as did Lily's nervous behavior and her connection to Arthur. The handkerchief with the embroidered A remained a tantalizing clue, its true owner unclear. Determined to test her suspicions, Miss Marple decided to revisit Candlewick Vale, where the gardens held secrets, and the manor's inhabitants might reveal more under gentle prodding. She donned a woolen shawl and her trusty hat, her knitting bag slung over her arm, and set out along the familiar path. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls catching the sunlight, but its grandeur was tempered by an air of unease, as if the house itself sensed the weight of hidden truths. In the drawing room, Mrs. Hargrove received her with a strained smile, her black dress as impeccable as ever. The silver tea service gleamed on the sideboard, a silent reminder of the poisoned cup. "Miss Marple," the widow said, her voice laced with weariness. "You're very kind to call again. This dreadful business has left me quite shaken." "I can imagine," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair, her needles clicking softly. "The vicar's death has stirred up old memories, hasn't it? I recall the talk after your husband's passing, such unkind rumors, quickly dispelled." Mrs. Hargrove's fingers tightened on her lace handkerchief. "Yes, cruel gossip. Charles died of a heart attack, as Dr. Hayes confirmed. The vicar was a great comfort, silencing those whispers." Her eyes darted to the tea service, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in her hand. "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "Though I wonder if the vicar ever revisited those rumors. He was a perceptive man, always noticing the little things." She paused, watching the widow's reaction. Mrs. Hargrove's face hardened. "He never mentioned it. Why should he? It was settled years ago." Her voice was sharp, and Miss Marple sensed a wall of defensiveness, as if the widow guarded a secret tied to her husband's death. As they spoke, Lily Baxter entered with suggested a tool like Dr. Hayes's scissors, not Harold's rusty shears. The shard of glass she had found yesterday, now safely in her knitting bag, hinted at a discarded vial, perhaps the one from the doctor's bag. Her thoughts were interrupted by Arthur Whitaker, who appeared from the rose maze, his paint-stained jacket slung over his shoulder. "Miss Marple," he called, his smile forced. "Out for a stroll? These gardens inspire my work, you know." His eyes darted to the foxglove, and Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease. "They're lovely," she said, her tone disarming. "Though I hear you were seen near the tea tent during the fete, not in the woods as you claimed. Fetching paints, was it?" Arthur's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "Yes, just grabbing supplies from my satchel. I was only there a moment."
Surely you don't think I had anything to do with—" He trailed off, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Of course not, dear," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Though I wonder if you saw anyone else near the tent. The vicar's cup was tampered with, after all." Arthur shook his head, his fingers fidgeting. "It was crowded. I didn't notice anything odd." But his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple sensed he was hiding something. Perhaps a glimpse of the true culprit, or his own involvement. As she returned to the village, Miss Marple encountered Inspector Craddock near the churchyard, his face etched with frustration. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "We've released Finch, but we're closing in on Arthur. Mrs. Grayson's testimony places him at the tent, and that note's ink is definitely his. We're searching his studio now." Miss Marple's lips pursed thoughtfully. "A compelling case, Inspector. But I wonder if you've considered Dr. Hayes. His knowledge of digitalis and his connection to Mrs. Hargrove's late husband are worth examining." Craddock frowned. "Hayes? He's cooperative and there's no clear motive. The churchyard dispute wasn't enough, but as a pawn, or a mastermind. And Lily's lie about the scissors tied her to the foxglove, possibly under someone's influence." Miss Marple decided to test one final thread. She visited the vicarage, where the housekeeper allowed her to examine the vicar's study again. Among his papers she found a letter, half-written, addressed to the bishop. It mentioned concerns about a past injustice, and hinted at a conversation with Dr. Hayes about an old case. The letter was unfinished, but its implications were clear. The vicar had been digging into Charles Hargrove's death, and Dr. Hayes was involved. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting needles clicking as she pieced together the puzzle. The suspects were narrowing. Mrs. Hargrove, whose wealth and past were shadowed by suspicion. Dr. Hayes, whose medical expertise and connection to the Hargrove family made him a prime candidate. And Arthur and Lily, whose romance and actions suggested complicity or manipulation. The forged note was a distraction, but the vial, the scissors, and the ledger were tangible clues pointing to a motive rooted in the past. The village settled into dusk, the church bell tolling softly. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the tea tent, where a delicate cup had delivered death. The culprit was close, their actions hidden in the ordinary moments of St. Mary Mead, a glance, a lie, a cut stem. Tomorrow she would gather the suspects, setting a trap to unravel the truth. As her needles danced, she felt the net closing, the mystery's heart within reach. Chapter 9. The Drawing Room Drama. The evening shadows lengthened over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a cloak of twilight that mirrored the deepening mystery of Reverend Thomas Whitaker's poisoning at Candlewick Vale's garden fete. The air was crisp, laced with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, as if autumn itself conspired to unveil long-buried secrets. Miss Jane Marple, having narrowed the web of suspicion through meticulous observation, the precise cuts on the foxglove stems, the unlabeled vial in Dr. Hayes' bag, the forged notes incriminating ink, and gestured to the assembled guests. Arthur lounged in an armchair, his paint-stained fingers drumming nervously. Lily hovered by the door, twisting her apron. Dr. Hayes stood rigidly by the fireplace, his medical bag at his feet. And Inspector Craddock, arriving last, eyed the group with professional detachment. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice steady and warm as she took a seat, her knitting bag settled beside her. "This tragedy has weighed heavily on our village,
but I believe the truth is within reach. The poison, digitalis from foxglove, was placed in the vicar's special teacup, that delicate china one with the rose pattern, during the distraction of the games at the fete. The room tensed, eyes darting suspiciously. Mrs. Hargrove's lips thinned. Miss Marple, this is hardly the time for speculation. The police have their leads. Inspector Craddock nodded curtly. Quite right. We're pursuing solid evidence, not village theories. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, undeterred. Oh, but the evidence is here, Inspector, hidden in plain sight. Let us consider the clues. The foxglove stems in the garden showed cuts made with a precise tool, not a gardener's shears, but medical scissors, borrowed perhaps from Dr. Hayes's bag. She turned to Lily, who paled. Lily, dear, you admitted to using them, though your sewing kit was complete. Why the lie? Lily stammered. I was scared, miss. I cut some roses, that's all. Arthur leaned forward, his voice sharp. Leave her alone. She had nothing to do with it. I was near the tent, yes, but only for paints. Mrs. Hargrove interjected, her voice rising. This is absurd. The vicar and I argued over funds, but I'd never poison him. And that forged note? Someone's trying to frame me. Perhaps you, Arthur, with your debts and your uncle's money. Fingers pointed. Accusations flew like sparks from a fire. Dr. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his face ashen. Enough. Digitalis is my prescription, but I didn't harvest for the inheritance. The vicar threatened to expose us both. Gasps rippled through the room. Inspector Craddock's hand went to his notebook. Mrs. Hargrove, is this a confession? But Miss Marple interjected, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. No, madam, it is not you. Though your role in the cover-up is grave, the poisoner of the vicar was Dr. Hayes himself, for love of you, and to bury his own malpractice forever. Dr. Hayes paled, staggering back against the mantel. How could you know? It was an accident with Charles, an experimental dose gone wrong. Eleanor promised marriage if I helped falsify the certificate. But the vicar discovered it all, confronted me days before the fete. He'd exposed my negligence, ruin me. I harvested the foxglove with my own scissors, slipped the extract into his cup during the game's distraction. The unlabeled vial in my bag was the remainder. I meant to discard it. Lily whimpered. You asked me to borrow the scissors, Doctor. Said it was for an emergency. Arthur glared. And you planted the note to frame Mrs. Hargrove, making it look like the vicar's feud with her. Dr. Hayes collapsed into a chair, his hands covering his face. Yes, all to protect what Eleanor and I had. The vicar's death mimicked Charles's, digitalis for a heart attack. But you, Miss Marple, the cuts, the vial, the ink. How? Miss Marple folded her hands, her expression serene. Observation, Doctor. The precise cuts matched surgical tools, not garden ones. Your shaky hands at my tea betrayed fear, not guilt alone. The vicar's unfinished letter to the bishop mentioned an old case with you, and the shard of glass from the garden, remnant of your broken vial. Arthur's alibi crumbled, but his innocence shone through. He saw you near the tent but stayed silent out of shock. Lily's lie protected you unwittingly. Mrs. Hargrove's handkerchief and the forged note were red herrings you orchestrated. Cobblestone lanes, lined with thatched cottages and blooming hedgerows, hummed with the tentative return of normalcy, as if the village itself sighed in relief after the arrest of Dr. Reginald Hayes for the poisoning of Reverend Thomas Whitaker. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery and the faint perfume of late roses, a reminder that autumn's quiet beauty was settling in. Miss Jane Marple, her sharp mind now at ease with the mystery resolved, invited Inspector Craddock and a few villagers to her cottage for morning tea, a ritual to restore peace and unravel the final threads of the case. Miss Marple's cottage was a haven of coziness, its parlor adorned with chintz curtains, a polished oak table, and a vase of daisies that caught the sunlight streaming through lace-curtained windows. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room, while a tray of scones, clotted cream, and a steaming teapot of Earl Grey waited on the table. Miss Marple, dressed in a pale blue cardigan and her usual tweed skirt, moved with her characteristic grace, pouring tea into delicate cups as her guests arrived. Inspector Craddock, his stern demeanor softened by the resolution of the case, sat alongside Mrs. Clara Bantry, whose cheerful curiosity had been a constant companion, and Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, the tea shop owner, whose gossip had provided many a clue. "Thank you for joining me," Miss Marple said, her voice warm and steady as she handed out cups. "This dreadful affair has shaken our village, but the truth, like a good cup of tea, brings clarity and comfort. Inspector, perhaps you'd like to hear the full explanation of how Dr. Hayes came to poison the vicar." Craddock, sipping his tea, nodded with a grudging smile. "I'll admit, Miss Marple, your insights were invaluable. I'd like to hear it all laid out." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly as she began. The key was in the ordinary, as it often is. The vicar's death was no random act. It was a desperate attempt to silence a truth from 5 years ago. The death of Charles Hargrove. Bishop mentioned an old case involving Dr. Hayes. The Reverend confronted the doctor days before the fete, threatening to expose the malpractice. Dr. Hayes, fearing ruin and hoping to protect his secret engagement to Mrs. Hargrove, saw no choice but to act. Mrs. Pritchard leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But how did he do it, Miss Marple? In broad daylight, with all of us there." Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. The fete was the perfect cover. Dr. Hayes harvested foxglove from the manor's gardens, using his surgical scissors for precision, as evidenced by the clean cuts I found. He prepared the digitalis extract, storing it in an unlabeled vial in his medical bag. The shard of glass I discovered in the garden was from its accidental breakage. During the game's distraction, when Lily Baxter left the tea tray unattended, he slipped the poison into the vicar's special teacup, the one with the rose pattern he always used. The digitalis mimicked a heart attack, just as it had with Charles Hargrove. Craddock frowned, setting down his cup. "But the red herrings, Harold Finch's vial, Arthur's note, the handkerchief?" Miss Marple nodded. "Clever distractions, all. The vial in Harold's shed, containing only fertilizer, was planted to frame him, exploiting his gruff demeanor. The forged note accusing Mrs. Hargrove of embezzlement, written in Arthur's blue ink, was Dr. Hayes's attempt to shift suspicion to her, knowing the vicar's financial inquiries would make it plausible. Arthur's presence in the vicar's study, where I found the purple paint smudge, was innocent. He was searching for loan documents, not planting evidence. The handkerchief, marked with an H for Hargrove, was dropped by Mrs. Hargrove during the fete, mistaken for Arthur's A in the chaos, adding to the confusion. Mrs. Bantry shook her head. And poor Lily, she seemed so guilty with those scissors and her nerves. A pawn, I'm afraid, Miss Marple said gently. Lily borrowed alone, driven by fear of exposure and devotion to her. Craddock leaned back, his expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. You saw all this in the little things, cuts, vials, paint smudges. I'll be damned, Miss Marple. The evidence backs it up. The vial's residue matched digitalis, and Hayes confessed fully. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. Human nature, Inspector, is predictable in its unpredictability. The vicar's kindness made him a threat, and Dr. Hayes's love became his downfall. St. Mary Mead is a small place, but its heart holds as much complexity as any city. The room fell silent, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the clink of teacups. Mrs. Bantry sighed, spreading jam on a scone. It's a sad tale, Jane, but you said it right. The village can breathe again. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. Though I wager Mrs. Hargrove won't show her face at the tea shop for a while. And Arthur and Lily, will they be all right? I believe so, Miss Marple said. Arthur's debts are minor, and his heart is true. Lily's loyalty was misplaced, but she's young and will learn. They'll find their way, with the vicar's memory guiding them. As the guests finished their tea, the conversation turned to lighter matters, the upcoming harvest festival, the church roof repairs, the children's games on the green. Miss Marple listened, her eyes bright, but her thoughts lingered on the case. The red herrings, Harold's vial, Arthur's note, the handkerchief, had been untangled, revealing the truth in the ordinary. A doctor's desperation, a widow's greed, a village's secrets. Justice had been served, not with fanfare, but with the quiet clarity of truth. The guests departed, leaving Miss Marple alone in her parlor. She rose to clear the tea tray, pausing by the window to gaze at the village green where children played under the watchful eye of the church spire. The sun climbed higher, its light spilling over the cottages and gardens, restoring the cozy charm that defined St. Mary Mead. Yet Miss Marple knew that beneath